Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this episode and all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky, do remember to click subscribe. Today's guest is joining us after nearly 5 years. He made an appearance very early on season 1 when we used to film the show in my front room. He's a dear brother and friend, but most importantly, he is known for being a former prisoner of Guantanamo Bay. He is a veteran human rights activist and the outreach director for advocacy group Cage, and that's none other than Moazzam Begg. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Dilly, and it's a pleasure to be here once again.
Jazakallah khairan, Habib. It's been a minute. It's been nearly 5 years. Last time you were on, we're actually going to discuss very similar topics that we did 5 years ago.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to be here. I've just recently come back from Afghanistan. Inshallah, we'll be speaking about that. But, you know, things move on, things change, and we're in a world now which we couldn't have recognized just a few years ago. So time continues to change, and we just pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us firm on our principles, even though we continue to change.
Ameen. So let's start with Afghanistan. You've just got back. You've made multiple trips since liberation. What were you doing there?
So I've been back to Afghanistan now. I say back because I used to live there before in 2001. And I've been back since the liberation 6 times over the past couple of years. And primarily that was to make a film with Al Jazeera about returning to particularly the Bagram prison and also to put focus on the last remaining Afghan prisoner in Guantanamo, and that is Mohammed Rahim. So in my subsequent visits there, I've gone with my lawyer, Clive Stafford-Smith. Now, interestingly, Clive Stafford-Smith, the first time I ever met him in my life was in Camp Echo Maximum Security Isolation in Guantanamo. And he'd been working on death row cases and was introduced as such when I first saw him. And taking that man with me, who I told about the murder that I witnessed in Bagram and the torture, and to walk then into the Bagram detention facility with this man was a really a unique moment. But we weren't here this time for my story because I'd already told that through the Jazeera earlier on. Now we were here investigating what had happened to Aafia Siddiqui in Bagram prison. Now, we took with us many former prisoners, Afghans, who were held, some right next to her in makeshift wooden cells that were converted and constructed in the Bagram prison. And they told us in painful detail the screams, the noises, the crying, the talking, the broken understanding between them and Aafia not being a Pashto or Farsi speaker. And we established and got written testimony from a multitude of people. And this is crucial because the Americans say that Aafia was not in Bagram. And these prisoners, one by one, all including some high-ranking members and other ordinary people, gave testimony to when Aafia was there, what she looked like, how her conditions were, and it is too widely corroborated for it to all be a concocted lie by all of these people. So this is part of the evidence, and there's more evidence we're gathering in terms of what happened to her infamously in the police station in Ghazni, where she was accused of trying to kill an American soldier. So we're working again. Once again, we've managed to get testimony after testimony, including former members of the Afghan government who have said that what Aafia is accused of is simply untrue and impossible, and that is the attempted murder of an American soldier while she was captive herself.
What is the significance of proving that she was in Bagram?
The significance of that is because in her case, when she went to trial, I think 2008, 2009, the judge excluded or precluded anything that was to do with her imprisonment in Bagram. And that is crucial because not only was she tortured in Bagram, her 2 children, Maryam and Ahmed, were taken into custody. One child, and both those children are technically US citizens because they were born in the USA. So this was happening to US citizens in Afghanistan. Maryam was taken into the custodianship of an American family that lived in an area called the Green Village in Afghanistan, and essentially they were the CIA, we believe. And Ahmed was taken to a juvenile prison. Now, Maryam was 3, Ahmed was 6. So we're trying to uncover all of this, again, with press conferences, putting out imagery of the kids at the time, for witnesses to come forward, and some have, and some we're still attempting to get.
How helpful has the Islamic Imara been with regards to the investigation and putting together these evidences and testimonies and stuff?
Well, the proof is in the pudding. Clive Stafford-Smith, who is Aafia's lawyer now, has been for the past 3 or so years, has never had the opportunity to investigate the allegations and the things that Aafia has said from her side of the story, because there was nobody there that you could trust to be able to give you access to all of these places and people. Since the Imara has come into power, we've had nothing but support at every level, at the very highest level of government to the ordinary person on the street. Even former police officers who worked in the police station, the custody sergeants. It was alleged that Aafia had lists of weapons and chemical weapons and all sorts of ridiculous, I would say, Four Lions type allegations in there. And we've been able to really easily disprove them simply by speaking to the custody sergeant at the time and said, can you tell us what Aafia had in her possession at the time? And he details those things, none of which include weapons, none of which include lists of targets, none of which include any of those things that were alleged about her. So the question has to be asked as to, well, why was Aafia not only taken into custody for a crime that happens in Afghanistan, so jurisdiction should have been in Afghanistan. I've met people who've killed American soldiers in battle, let alone accused of attempted murder. They're not serving 86-year prison sentences in America. Some of them are out, some of them are in powerful positions. So there has to be a really strong question as to why did this happen? And we can discuss that, inshallah.
So what is the why?
The why is a multitude of...
Why did Sister Aafia Siddiqui, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, a super intelligent woman of faith, abducted in the way that she was and now serving such a long, heavy jail sentence, and in the process being tortured and being treated in horrific ways? What is it about her specifically, whereby so many of brothers and that were kept in Guantanamo are now out free? If you look at certain individuals that are in very senior positions in Afghanistan,
Indeed.
Right? So what is it about Sister Aafia's case?
Indeed, I say this to many of the senior members of the Islamic Emirate who were in Guantanamo with us ourselves, who are now ministers at the highest level. And the question is, first of all, her own government's role in handing her over to the Americans. There was false information given up about her, which in the beginning put her on the Al-Qaeda most wanted list, or the FI's most wanted list. They made certain assumptions about her, which all proved to be lies, that she was involved in getting blood diamonds from West Africa. As I said, one accusation against her, that she was in Ghazni. Now, Ghazni has produced the most mujahideen in that region than any other place, very strong people. Yeah. That she was going to bomb a mosque. As I said, these are Four Lions type allegations, called the Al-Jihad Mosque. That's one of the allegations against her.
Mad.
And so they all disappear, these allegations. None of them appear in her charge and her prosecution. And essentially, she gets prosecuted for the attempted murder of an American soldier.
Whilst in detention.
While she's in detention, in the police station in Ghazni, when the Americans turn up, she's been taken into custody.
She tried getting his gun.
They say, and I have never come across a single case, not myself, and this is not for want of desire of trying or attempting to, wishing to, that an American soldier in tens of thousands of cases has ever left his arm, his sidearm or his main weapon lying around so that a prisoner could pick it up and use it. So that's what Aafia is accused of, that she peeked behind this curtain and there just miraculously happened to be an M4 rifle that she picked up. And not only did she pick up, she knew somehow how to cock the gun, which is quite different to the system on an AK-47 and M4, which I don't know how she could have known that. And then she also knew where the safety catch was. Unless what we're saying is that the American soldier had chambered around, put it off safety, leaned it against the wall, and put it next to where Aafia was. So none of these questions were properly interrogated. And there's much more, because they claim that Aafia shot from point-blank range. This is a lady Al-Qaeda who's highly trained in the use of American weapons, which most people don't even know how to use at that time. And she misses. They, in turn, one of them takes out his sidearm and he returns fire, and it wounds her in her stomach. She's almost killed. So they want us to believe all of this. And in court, it was literally their word against Aafia's. No outside witnesses, no forensic evidence, nothing. It was just at the time of war. She's Lady Al-Qaeda. Who are you going to believe? Her or our brave soldiers. And it was as simple as that.
How helpful and willing have the Pakistani authorities been with Clive's investigation?
So Clive has gone to Pakistan many times. He, of course, meets with Fawzia, who is a fantastic advocate for her own sister. And Clive often says, if ever I get imprisoned or anything happens to me, I want a sister like that.
MashaAllah.
And so Fawzia has been working day and night, despite all of the problems they've had. And they've suffered terribly in terms of threats from the previous Pakistani authorities and so forth. There has been some attempt at seeking their intervention somehow, and they could easily do it. They could seek to sign a mutual treaty between the two countries whereby Aafia could serve the rest of her sentence in Pakistan. Clive himself has just finished a clemency plea of at least 56,000 words explaining the situation of Aafia. And just to digress slightly, Aafia is in a place called FMC Carswell, which is a federal medical center, which is the only federal medical center in the whole of America for women. She's been in this place that has been nicknamed a rape camp. And that's because 13 officers over the past 7 years have been convicted for either raping the female prisoners there or serious sexual assault. She's been physically assaulted several times by other prisoners who are, let's say, from the criminal class or whatever you want to call them. She's a short, 5'2", petite young woman, or was a young woman, and has been physically beaten with some of her teeth getting broken, a hot liquid thrown into her face. And that's when she's not in solitary confinement, when she mostly is. So there's all of that happening to Aafia Siddiqui, and the Pakistani authorities are hearing this. They're hearing people talk about this. They're hearing the fact that myself and Clive are going to Afghanistan, and there's a huge amount of support from the ordinary person to the person at the top. And Pakistan, in relation to that, as a government, isn't doing anything, or at least not enough to get the, as she's called, Qawm Ki Beti, which means the daughter of the nations. Well, the daughter of your nation has been violated more times than we can.
We made that title for her, the daughter of the nation.
I'm not sure whether it became generic several years ago. Yeah. I don't know now where it exactly originated from, but it's a name that stuck.
Sister Fawzia wrote an open letter to Imran Khan, right? Remember that famous open letter?
Yeah, she wrote a letter before. Of course, it's important that, first of all, I told Yvonne Ridley many years ago, about 2008 or 7, that I used to hear the screams of a woman there in Bagram. And Yvonne Ridley herself then went to Bagram. And this was not at a time when we can go with the Emiras in control, the Islamic Emirate, but when the previous government was in control. And there was a lot of hostility, and Yvonne had to face bullets, literally, under those bullets, go to Bagram to try to find out what's happening to Aafia. And she eventually took the story to Imran Khan, and Imran Khan became a strong advocate. I remember meeting him a couple of times in the UK, and we spoke about Aafia's case, and he was disgusted by what had taken place.
Before he was PM.
Before he was Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So after becoming Prime Minister, it seems that because, and we know, of course, we see this, he himself now is a prisoner of those very people who, for one reason or the other, he remained silent on the case of Aafia because of. And we strongly believe that just as when Fawzi had written to him, asking him to restart the case of Aafia Siddiqui, that it was the ISI's interventions, as they have indeed when the Islamic Emirate has wanted to seek her return in prisoner exchange, that it has been the Pakistan intelligence services that have intervened, essentially to say, this is our citizen, you have no right. And so this is now a matter of honor, dignity for whoever has it to seek Aafia's return, whichever way it happens to be, whether it's through diplomacy, whether it's through clemency, whether it's through the case being reviewed through the courts. Aafia is slowly but surely beginning to lose control of her mental faculties. We still don't know what happened to her son Suleiman. To this day, she's not seen him. And imagine what it does just to a mother. Just imagine the mothers in our lives, the wives in our lives who have children, your own and my own. Imagine, as a father, you could survive. As a father, the children could survive. What about a mother?
Horrendous, bro. Horrendous. Allah Mustaan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasten her release.
I mean,
All of those who have been unjustly imprisoned.
how you?
For our younger viewers who kind of didn't live through the 9/11, 7/7 Woolwich period, and Gaza has been like the first exposure of a war against Islam and Muslims of that region, and ideologically in the Western countries that we live in. How does Guantanamo still be relevant to the younger Muslims?
Guantanamo is essentially a microcosm of the Ummah. Wherever you see the most resistance, you see that number of people in Guantanamo.
Afghans.
So primarily you had Afghans.
Algerians?
You had Yemenis, Saudis, Pakistanis, Algerians, Libyans, and then Europeans. The only nationality you wouldn't find there is Americans, even though there were Americans who were captured in the War on Terror. And that is because they couldn't and wouldn't, according to US law, send any Americans to Guantanamo. Not to say that Americans captured in the War on Terror weren't abused and mistreated. You had Prisoner 001, John Walker Lind, who was thrown straight into prison and was only recently released. But the point of Guantanamo, it's a place where that becomes essentially, we call it the Jamiat Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. It becomes the University of Yusuf. And the University of Yusuf, in colloquial terms amongst prisoners, is a prison where there is no books. You don't learn anything except from your other prisoners and from your abusers. And one of the beautiful things about Guantanamo is now it created, by definition, a camaraderie, which the Americans had never intended. But now we have a strong understanding network of former prisoners. You may have never seen one another, yet you know each other intimately. And that goes for members of the Islamic Emirates, whether they are senior members who now facilitate our trips, or ordinary people who are released. And there is still, so the two parts of what you said for younger viewers or younger listeners is that if you want to make the connection and understand what Guantanamo is, it's a prison where people are detained without charge or trial because they're accused of terrorism. But the primary condition to be a prisoner in Guantanamo, do you know what that is?
You have to be a Muslim?
You have to be a Muslim. You have to. If you are not a Muslim, if you say a member of the real IRA or the Tamil Tigers who carry out suicide bombings or the Michigan militias or any of those, you will never, the consideration for you to go to Guantanamo doesn't even occur. It doesn't occur. Anders Breivik, the guy who killed 77 people in Norway, there was no way that he was going to be sent to Guantanamo. It wasn't even a consideration. So the primary consideration, and you don't have to have harmed a fly to go to Guantanamo. It's just the accusation is enough for you to be there.
How many prisoners are left there?
So now there's 30 prisoners left. Amongst them is Mohammad Rahim, who is the final Afghan prisoner. I speak regularly to his family, and we're trying and working to get him released. But crucially, to connect to make the circle complete, what connects Guantanamo to Gaza? It's a man called Abu Zubaydah, Zain al-Abidin Mohammed Hussein. He is a young man who is from Gaza originally. He grew up in Saudi Arabia. In the 90s, he went to go and join what was left of Abdul Azzam brigades because he wanted to be part of an army that comes from Afghanistan, that's been involved in the liberation of Afghanistan from the Soviet Union. But essentially, as Abdul Azzam, the great Palestinian scholar, he wanted to create an army of liberation that marches from Afghanistan and liberates Palestine.
So he wanted Palestine?
Yeah, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be part of that. And he was involved in some of that stuff, but he wasn't part of Al-Qaeda, and everybody knows it, including the CIA, the FBI, and everybody else. They all know that he's not part of Al-Qaeda. Now, Abu Zubaydah was tortured beyond belief. And one of the techniques used against him was known as tortura del agua, a.k.a. waterboarding, whereby a man, he is tied down to the floor and to a bunk. His hands, his legs, and his head. A cloth is stuffed into his mouth, and water is poured repeatedly into his nose, so he feels like he's drowning even though he's not submerged. That happens to him at least 83 times. It happens in Thailand in a place called the Cat's Eye Prison, run by a woman called Gina Haspel, who later becomes the head of the CIA. He's sent then to Poland, to Lithuania, to Romania, and after an odyssey of imprisonment, he's sent to Guantanamo. A few years ago, Abu Zubaydah made self-portraits of torture, right now, and this will blow you away. Amongst the self-portraits of his torture, they're published in the New York Times, is imagery of him in a coffin. He's alive and he's naked. There are holes in that coffin that are used, you think, to so that he can breathe, but actually it's to pour water in. Abu Zubaydah is a Muslim. He practices Islam, and I have met him. He says he wants to pray. How does he pray alive in a coffin naked? How do you pray? Has any scholar come along and said to you, this is the fiqh behind how you do this? There's no wudu, no qibla, no wuquf, no ruku, no sajda, none of the basic arkan or the pillars of the prayer. But he performs his prayer. And that's Abu Zubaydah. Everybody who meets Abu Zubaydah, from all the lawyers and so forth that know him, they love his character.
Where is he now?
He's still in Guantanamo. And one of the things that happened to Abu Zubaydah is that this, again, it blows you away. No charge, no trial. He's received compensations being forced by the European Court of Human Rights for the Romanian, Lithuanian, and Polish governments to compensate him to the tune of around $500,000 while he's in Guantanamo. And we are trying desperately to find a place where Abu Zubaydah can be sent. Not because of what he's done, but because what was done to him, they don't want to release him. And that's how you connect. If you want to look at Gaza, what's happening now, this young man, as a child, he walks into the streets in Gaza, occupation tanks coming in, he grabs a stone, throws it, and they beat up his relatives and kill his relatives and attack his home. It's that kid. That's who that kid is. And the circle has not ended.
The 30 remaining detainees at Gitmo, is Cage involved in most or all of those cases, or in some of the cases?
Yeah, we're involved in, we're involved in many, many of the cases. Not every single one I can say, but by extension. Now, this is as Clive, he doesn't just represent 80 clients. He'll help anyone at all. And this is, we don't make any distinction about, it's just about practicalities. Can you help or can you not? So we are helping several cases. There's one brother who's just been released now. Again, another shocking story. His son is here, Yusuf. Beautiful, wonderful kid. He just graduated from Westminster University. His father, last time I saw him, was in Bagram. He is from Tatarstan in Russia. He was tortured, abused for 15 years in Guantanamo, after which they resettled him. And the agreement of the resettlement was that he will be freed upon resettlement, which is what happens to the majority of prisoners who can't go home for fear of torture, which is why he couldn't go. He feared that the Russians might torture him. He remained in prison in the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, for 8 years. He was just released a couple of weeks ago, went back to his home in Tatarstan. He told me that he knocked at the door. His 89-year-old mother answered the door. She said, "Who's there?" He said, "I'm your son." And when she opened the door, she fainted because she saw this man now who'd grayed and aged over all of these years. And I remember when I used to speak to him in Bagram, we weren't allowed to talk. He couldn't speak Arabic or Pashto or Farsi or Urdu, and I couldn't speak Russian. But we used to have conversations with him together in sign language. And this Tatarstan Russian was so dignified, whenever he saw them abuse the Quran, he'd stand up and want to fight them, and they would beat him down, but he would never fall. And he became very famous amongst the brothers. Everybody knows him.
Charity is just a band-aid solution. In 2024, charity alone isn't enough. In 2024, is donating enough? Because giving charity to the oppressed only treats their symptoms. It's like putting a plaster over a deep wound. It's important and needed, but it doesn't fix the problem. But speaking up against the oppressors can cure the disease. Help and support organisations like Human Aid and Advocacy that do both. Humanitarian aid is crucial, but fighting for justice brings real change. As Muslims, it's our duty to stand up for the truth. Do your part by supporting Human Aid and Advocacy.
I know this is a bit of a random question. You know, when you've had the life experiences that you've had, especially in Guantanamo and Bagram, and obviously being connected with all the other detainees, their struggles, their bravery, their honour. What do you think when you see online polemics between Muslims?
I have a Twitter presence. I have several thousands of followers on Twitter, so I understand the importance of making comment in that Twitter sphere or X sphere, whatever you want to call it. But I always hold it to the caveat. Just as you asked that question of what would I think to myself, what would those brothers think if I got involved in these conversations? And so I generally try to avoid them. It does happen. I've got involved in some of them with, in the past, with its far right, far left, ISIS, whatever. It does happen. But there's this beautiful statement that Al-Khidr makes to Musa alayhi salam about the travel. He says to him, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. How are you going to have patience on something that you have no experience of? And what that means to me is, guys, you have a lot of experience of this world. Alhamdulillah, step out. Step out of those silos you've created that are, in a sense, artificial, and walk the path of people who've really struggled and paid a price for this ummah. There is no victory without sacrifice, and there's no victory without bravery. You never see a coward win a war, ever. Whether that's in Gaza, whether that's in Syria, whether that's in Afghanistan, or wherever it is, whether it's the time of the Sahaba, there is no victory without sacrifice. It is impossible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you verse after verse in the Quran, which says, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you think you're going to enter Jannah without being tested like those who came before you? Allah Azza wa Jalla says that again and again and again and again. And if you think that your quote-unquote jihad is having a debate with the best of respect, with a talk show host or on a Twitter sphere, nobody gives a damn. Not in Gaza, not in Afghanistan, of how good a speaker you are or how sharp your words are on Twitter. Come along and see how good your speeches are there. Nobody cares, because you have when the Native Americans used to have this thing where they say, here is a list, here's a history of my people and the people I've fought. That's what they've got there. They've got a history. They'll present that to you, and if you have any honor, you'd say, alhamdulillah, it's time for me to shut up.
Would you encourage brothers who are involved in polemics and debates and this type of discourse to travel to places like Afghanistan to just get a different feel and a different vibe of what reality looks like when...
I would, really, in one sense, but I'd say, the war's over, mate. You're too late. It's been done. So people, with the greatest respect for everybody, you're entering that space now. Dude, where were you for the past 20-odd years? Where were you when it was needed? Where were you when your polemics and your debate and your so forth, when it was needed? Where were you? All of you. From the ulama to the shuyukh to the du'at, where were you? No point in saying, inna kunna ma'akum, we were always with you. Well, where's your proof? Where's the proof that you were there?
That's true.
And sorry, this is an important part, because when now Gaza's happening, right? It's much more intense. And for all of us, I count myself in this. Where are we? Really, when it matters, where the hell are we? I met some brothers from a particular organization in Afghanistan recently, and they said, mashallah, we're here now I said, and it's peaceful now. There's no threat to you. You're still worried about the association on your stamp. When you go back over, they might stop you. I said, if you're that scared, keep yourself out of it. But let me ask you a question. The organization that you're part of has tens of thousands of followers. How about you turn up outside one of the embassies just for 1 hour? Don't even say anything. Don't shout. Just be there and make a dua. Your presence, your numbers would count for something. But you won't, and you never will, because unfortunately, the majority of some of our people are so filled with the need for self-preservation, called hikmah, but actually a disguise for cowardice.
On the issue of Gaza, it's been over a year, and I guess with previous wars, with genocides, invasions, internet and smartphones weren't as popular. We're literally seeing a genocide unfold in 4K, in HD, pretty much every day. This wasn't the case with previous wars and genocides. How have you been? I mean, I ask you that because I know that Muslims of all walks of life have been impacted by this. Even the youth, for the first time, young nephews, nieces, younger siblings. For the first time, they're seeing this. We saw Afghanistan, we saw Iraq, we saw Syria, we saw the drone bombings in Somalia and in Yemen and in the tribal areas of Pakistan. But it wasn't as televised. It wasn't as filmed and documented. It wasn't that yes, we saw some horrific stuff come from Syria, but I'm saying it's just been so constant with Gaza, and it's for the first time a new younger generation has seen this for the first time. They maybe didn't connect with our stories about the war on terror. They maybe didn't connect with our stories about CVE and Prevent and the CTS. All this stuff was seemed a long time ago. They couldn't connect, but now they can due to Gaza. Have you been managing and coping in terms of the things that you've been seeing online and offline?
To be brutally honest, Dilly, as you said, I've been in Bosnia, I've been in Afghanistan, I've been in Syria. I've seen and witnessed all the atrocities and the horrors. But there's something different to when you watch it on your phone. It leaves an indelible mark on you. It's as if you've actually seen it. And I ask myself, I've gone through all of that stuff, but I don't think I've cried as much as ever with Gaza. And you know the reason why? Even with Syria, there's a big conversation to be had about Syria on this. But with Syria, there was a fight back. There was a very strong, organized, and then eventually deeply disorganized fight back.
A nearly successful fight back.
Well, there was initially, and it became deeply unsuccessful.
Yes, of course.
But the very fact that you're able to fight back, it's part of shifa sudur qawm al-mu'minin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَشْفِي صُدُورَ قَوْمِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ when you fight back. But here, it's so minuscule. The ability to even fight back is minuscule. And just the idea of fighting back is so much of an anathema. They're called terrorists right from the start, which delegitimizes anyone. And it's historically speaking, if you look at Palestine, there has never been any armed struggle that hasn't been deemed a terrorist response.
Yep.
Not whether it's Fatah, PLO, terrorists, whether it's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, pure, leftists, whether it's the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, you can say it in the name, whether it's Hamas, whether it's every single one. There isn't a single one, which means essentially Palestinians, even if they're Christians,
can't fight
George Habash and Abu Nidal, those groups, they're all deemed terrorist. So what it says essentially that any Palestinian resistance is an act of terrorism and delegitimized. And that puts you in a place of either, well, I don't really care, which is what organizations like Hamas do. And as far as other people are concerned, it becomes like a sense of despair. You are deep. I was speaking to somebody yesterday saying, I've never come across a conflict in our recent history where there's nothing you could do. And I say that again as somebody in all of those places, that you feel totally helpless. Just sometimes enjoying yourself. How can you enjoy yourself when this is happening? Famously, Salah ad-Din was known not to smile. He'd say, how can I smile when Al-Aqsa is occupied? And not only is Al-Aqsa occupied, its defenders are being exterminated.
Do you think the mask has slipped? Not that the mask ever fitted properly anyway. It was always slipping, and it always does slip, of this kind of moral high ground that certain Western governments take when it comes to international law and human rights and all this stuff. I mean,
for me, the mask slipped a very, very long time ago. From Guantanamo, Bagram, the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan. Guantanamo still to this day has this thing called honor bound. It has this plaque outside which soldiers salute honor bound, and the ranking soldier responds by saying, to defend freedom, sir. It's just a joke. You got people in there without charge or trial and you're saying it's honor bound to defend freedom. Shut up. The truth is that mask fell a long time ago. The invasion of Iraq, international law, you can even see it now with the ICJ and with the International Criminal Courts. I gave evidence. I was asked to give evidence to the International Criminal Court a few years ago alongside several Bagram prisoners about America's role in war crimes in Afghanistan. The United States threatened the International Criminal Court and the prosecutor Fatou Bensouda was put under sanctions. They threatened to arrest her if she came to America. I mean, you guys can't pretend about existing under international law. What's really sad for me isn't international law. It's the connecting Muslim countries, nations. Just take a look at Jordan. Jordan has 60% population of Palestinians.
Yep.
A 60%. The only time they've intervened in recently is when Iran was firing, these rockets.
And they intercepted.
And they intercepted a rocket from which at least 2 Jordanians were injured and possibly a third was killed in the West Bank because they intercepted these rockets and they fell on Palestinians. So I believe if this continues, Jordan escaped the Arab Spring for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
It escaped. But it will have a reckoning spring of its own at some point. It just cannot continue. The West calls Jordan one of our closest allies in the Middle East, and for good reason.
Yep.
There were people I know personally, who were sent, who went to go and visit relatives in Jordan, were arrested and handed over to the Israeli government. They remained in prison for 12 years, and nobody would take that person, though he was from the West Bank, except Gaza. And he remained in Gaza. And I don't know what became of him now. But that's just one example, I think, of many. It's not just a client state. Client state would be too soft a term. It's a state that is there for the protection of Israel. And that status quo, how long it can continue, I don't know.
What's your feeling? As someone, just what are your personal thoughts in terms of the direction of the region? Because you've got Israel now bombing Lebanon. You've got Israel now making advances into Syrian territory. You've got Israel bombing the Houthis. You've got Israel, an imminent attack, which we've been waiting for a couple of weeks on Iran. They've been rampaging around the region. And with impunity and without accountability, what's your personal feelings in terms of where all this is heading?
Personally, I think that Israel has been doing that for a long time. Any Arab country in the region, from Tunisia to Libya to Iraq, that are much further afield, historically, Israel's bombed them all. Now, because of the 48 war, 67, 73, and the terrible results that happened, the Arabs are terrified. But not only are they terrified, there's this active, as you know, the Abrahamic Accords, in order to normalize that situation. It was this tiny little organization that the West has deemed to be terrorist that put a spanner in that work. Otherwise, the normalization was proceeding, at a breakneck pace.
The leadership of Hamas, in multiple interviews, they said, look, it was actually to hinder the normalization process to put Gaza and the Palestinian statehood back on the agenda. On the issue of neighbouring countries, it's generally the kind of... Because there's a spectrum, isn't it? There's cowardice, there's treachery, there's complicity, there's collaboration, collusion, and most, if not all, Muslim majority countries fall within the governments and the rulers. They fall within a spectrum of that. And it's interesting because when you speak about Jordan, you're absolutely correct. It was one of the countries which dodged the Arab Spring. And with such a heavy Palestinian population and with spokesman of Hamas always appealing to Jordanians as well for some reason, I do wonder what's going to come out of Jordan and how many more people need to be killed before someone moves or does something. But do you think that's do you think that's a bit too optimistic? Yeah. Has the last 1 year proven that the neighbouring Arab countries, the regimes and the rulers really are of no use in terms of intervention and assistance of the besieged people of
It's
Gaza?
not only that they're of no use, they are complicit at best and at worst actually siding with the enemy. There's just no other way to describe it or to explain it. I often think about Afghanistan, and you've been to, it's called Tapa Wazir al-Burhan.
Yes.
And this is a place where I used to live in Afghanistan. Just behind it, there's this hill that's very beautiful there. They've got the biggest flag.
Biggest Shahada flag in the world.
Which is, in and of itself, to watch it when it's unfurled and it's flying in the wind is a thing to marvel at. But then below it is this replica Dome of the Rock, the Qubat al-Sakhra.
Yep.
And it is absolutely something to marvel. Now, they could have chosen any other symbol. They could have chosen Afghan mosque. They could have chosen Masjid al-Nabawi, Medina.
Kaaba.
They could have chosen. They chose that for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've been there when there've been demonstrations in relation to Gaza and Palestine, but it's like no other demonstration you'll see anywhere in the world.
I mean, August the 15th, on their Liberation Day, there was many, 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 many Palestinian flags.
Yes, of course. And So not only that, they see the leaders of the Palestinian resistance as things to marvel at. They themselves see them as examples. So that, for me, gives a sense that the Ummah is looking. There are places. Now, the West has demonized Afghanistan so much that it's hard even for Muslims from the West and elsewhere, even in the Arab world, to look there and say, well, that's Israel's dad. Forget Israel. Mm-hmm. That's Israel's dad. Mm-hmm. And Israel's dad had to run here with his tail between his legs, right, at best. So Israel can't be that bad. As the biggest boy in the block, you can't be that tough. Just imagine if word got through that an army of Afghan mujahideen are making their way across Iran, across Iraq, across Jordan. They're going to stomp right through Jordan, and they're coming for you. This is the meaning of Ru'b. Allah subhanahu says, that we'll strike fear into the hearts of the enemy. That's what they need to hear, and there needs to be a way of that. If the Ummah is full of cowards making different arguments for different reasons, they're Shia, and they're this, and they're that, whatever it is, whatever's happening, what are you doing? The question is you. Mm-hmm. Not everybody else. You. Look at yourself. Yawm al-Qiyamah, you're going to stand by yourself. Yawma yafirru al-mar'u min akhi wa ummihi wa abi wa sahibati wa bani. You're going to flee from everyone. What are you going to do? How are you going to answer? Allah is going to say, this took place in front of you because I allowed for these images to come on your phone and you just sat around and started arguing with this person and that person. We're all going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
On the subject of those who have done something and not done something, are able to do something, have supported the liberation cause and the cause of the Palestinians. Obviously, we're now seeing Israel has been bombing Lebanon, targeting what they're claiming to be targeting Hezbollah leadership. Nasrallah killed. We had the walkie-talkie and pager attack. We've seen the decimation of Dahiyya, a predominantly Shia neighborhood in the south of Lebanon, south of Beirut. And we saw some scenes from Idlib, Syrians rejoicing, happy that Hezbollah is being targeted. Nasrallah was killed. We've seen the relatives of Syrians, on X and elsewhere, having a far different approach to this. I want to put the Syrians aside because I think as human beings, it can be very difficult to remain neutral or quiet when those who are being targeted not too long ago or still are targeting your people. They killed your fathers, your sons, your husbands, raped your women, and these things happened in Syria by the very people who Israel is now targeting, right? Irrespective of where you fall in terms of theological lines, sectarian lines, political lines, we cannot deny that Hezbollah and Iran were involved in Syria in defense of the Assad regime. They don't deny it, and nor do those who fought them as part of the revolution deny it.
Of course.
What are your thoughts on this whole kind of they can't be trusted, Hezbollah and Iran are fake helpers to the Palestinians, Muslims shouldn't be sad over the death of the leadership of these countries and these groups and organizations because of what they did in Syria? That conversation is taking place on X. Very prominent Israeli media and Zionist commentators when Nasrallah was killed and the whole pager attack happened. They were like, hey, the Arab world is happy. The Sunni world is happy. This was the kind of media angle they took. But what's your thoughts been on this kind of quagmire situation whereby many Muslims would have taken a strong stance in solidarity with Syrians, but now find themselves in a situation whereby for that they can't accept that Hezbollah is being attacked and targeted, and in general Lebanon now as a country. Iran is very close to a war with Israel, an open war, one that can escalate very quickly. What's your thoughts on that, bro? Should there be some suspicion, or should this be a case of put all that aside now, this is not the time for it? What is your thoughts?
If we just step back a little bit, that famous letter that Osama bin Laden wrote to the American people that was published in The Guardian, and then a whole story came out of it in the TikTokers.
Recently.
Yeah, the TikTokers said, now we realize what it's all about.
They blew it up.
Yeah. So Yeah, he references Iraq, the first Gulf War invasion. He references Somalia and all of that stuff. But really, I think in that letter, Palestine is mentioned something like 8 to 10 times.
It was the most mentioned.
Yeah. So all of our conflicts, I won't say every single one of them, but especially in that region, they do go back to Palestine. That is the core for us. Even what happens in Syria and different parts of the Arab Spring, much of it, I won't say all of it, but much of it is led by Islamiyeen, by Islamic groups, Islamic leaders imprisoned and tortured and so forth, whether it's in Libya, whether it's in
Tunisia,
Syria and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And their call, all of their raison d'etre, whether it's from the Muslim Brotherhood or elsewhere, the central part of it is Tahrir al-Aqsa. The liberation of Al-Aqsa is always the central part of it. All of the written constitutions exist therein. So that's an important one to remember, because there, even when we now talk about Hezbollah and so forth, in that regard, we have a unified goal. We're not unified on everything else. Of course, there's all sorts of things, historically speaking, but there is a unified goal here in response to Al-Aqsa and Palestine. Hamas understand that very well and have worked with it and connected to it, yet they're ideologically from the same movements that fought the
for them in Syria,
that fought the Assad regime. So it's a difficult one for them also. But it isn't. We have to be able to compartmentalize this stuff, because otherwise you're going to find yourself rejoicing not at the death of Nasrallah, but at the destruction of your brothers and sisters in Gaza, at the occupation of Al-Aqsa. So you've got to connect yourself, first of all, primarily with your faith and your belief. If you start to make this only, and I say this as somebody, again, I don't speak from, I was sent to prison in Belmarsh as a high security Cat A prisoner.
Yep.
They wanted to put me away for 15 years at minimum for supporting the Syrian struggle. And they would have won. They would have got me away had I not argued that this was self-defense, not terrorism.
February 2014.
That was when I was arrested, and I was released in October that same year.
Without your day in court?
There was no day in court, because they didn't want to establish a precedent that jihad is not terrorism.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I was arguing. But I say this as I've lost many brothers. I've buried them in the Syrian soil, my hands covered in their blood. I know brothers who I lived with were beheaded by ISIS. I know people who were killed in airstrikes. My wife was there with me, who, we've been to your house.
Yes.
And she'd come home covered in the blood of Syrian children that she'd been treating in the hospital. So I don't speak about this lightly. And I've spoken to some of these people about that, who say you're speaking on the same side as, say, the pro-Assad left, etc., etc. And I say, please, just understand this, that polemics is one thing, but being in the field is something totally different. And I say this, that our brothers in Palestine need us now more than the Syrians did at that time, because there was support that existed. People could fight back. And the mistakes, whatever were made, whether they were intentional or unintentional, they happened. And some people fell victim to being used as pawns, and others were completely independent. But regardless, there was a fight back. It's like you're in a field and two people fight back, and the guy's just big and stronger than you, and you can't defeat him. But at least you had the opportunity to fight. What about if you've got your hands tied behind your back and the guy's kicking you to death, and there's everybody just standing there watching? Because that's the state of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And in that regard, if anybody comes to their sisters, forget, ideologically the Shia. Okay, ideologically we don't believe that what the Shia does do. But they do say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. I'm telling you that if atheist Russians came along and bombed the Israelis, we should be rejoicing and thankful and trying to support that in any way we can. Because the alternative is more young boys like Shaban Adol, who's recently got burnt alive. Whose conscience is that on? Who's coming to his defense? And the answer is nobody. So there's no point in us complaining about Iran's doing this, and why should we look to see the intention of Iran? And they're doing something. Hezbollah is doing something. Now the question is, forget the countries. What about the Jama'at al-Islamiyya, the Islamic groups who have existed in all of this? What are they doing to free our brothers in Palestine? The answer is they can't do anything, or they're not doing anything, and perhaps they're engaging with the polemics against. So it's a deeply moral question.
Do you want to make a real difference for Palestine? Here's your chance. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? What is your Islam worth if you remain silent in the face of a genocide? Every bombing in Palestine tests your faith. As Muslims, it's our duty to stand against oppression. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever among you sees evil, let him change it with his hand. If he's unable to do so, then let his tongue speak against it. And the lowest form of Iman is to hate it from within." Right now, our brothers and sisters in Palestine are suffering terrible persecution. 120,000 people have been martyred, 70% of whom were women and children. But what have you done about it? Help make a real change by supporting both aid and advocacy for Palestine. Apart from delivering aid, Human Aid has been advocating for the rights of Palestinians since 2010. Help support Human Aid and advocacy to support real change.
On the situation of the Syrians, when I see others engaging in these type of arguments and debates and discussions, TK, fine, okay. But with the Syrians, I felt it felt wrong to tell them how to feel. Do you understand that side? Like, it was wrong to tell them how to feel.
I'm very close with the Syrians. My son just married a Syrian.
Inshallah.
So I'm very close to the Syrians, and I understand. But this is a matter. Al-Aqsa is a matter of our deen. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-harami ila al-masjid al-Aqsa. That's in our Quran. To somehow in any way negate its sanctity because of what's happening in one place or the other is to be at best myopic to what's happening right there. There is it's clear, my daughter is a part of this organization called Law for Palestine, where they're systematically writing down the genocidal intent. They compiled all the genocidal intent from politicians, leaders, soldiers of Israel, and they're very clear about what they want to do, which is to take this region. And then sometimes they say it openly, and sometimes they say it, metaphorically.
The Greater Israel Project.
But yeah, they're very clear about that. So let's not pretend about what that's about. With the Syrians, there's no denying. First of all, Bashar al-Assad, he was never. When have they fired any bullets to take back the Golan Heights in all these years? When have they mounted an assault to take back the Golan Heights? They haven't. They worked alongside the Americans. They used to threaten me. The Americans used to threaten me in Bagram that if you don't cooperate with us, we'll send you to Syria. Imagine that. They'll send you to Syria. And I know they sent many people, Maher Arar, Muayyad Nuruddin, Abdul al-Maliki, Abdul al-Ma'ati, all these brothers, Syrian Canadian citizens, handed over by the Americans through a rendition process to the Assad regime, where they're severely tortured. Maher Arar is placed in a place called Farat Philistine, Palestine branch, where he's put in this intelligence place in a coffin-like cell for 11 months. The Canadian government, Justin Trudeau, apologized to him because of the role of the Canadians in his torture. So how is America working so closely? Abu Musab al-Suri is supposed to be an Al-Qaeda ideologue, is captured by the Americans in Pakistan and not sent to Guantanamo, sent to Syria. Why? And so you've got to understand there's an intelligence cooperation going on between these governments where they do work together against Islam. And that is really important that we understand this. And I've said this to those who are supportive of the Assad regime, and they have no answer. There's no answer at all. Why would the Americans sending people one after the other to the Syrian regime?
If there was an axis of, if Assad was resisting impunity.
They're your friends. You might dislike each other, but you dislike Islam even more, and you're both united on that.
Bringing the podcast to a close, Gaza has kind of made many of us, especially the privileged Westerners, review and reflect our priorities in life. Seeing your family, seeing your children, seeing your wife, the food that we eat, the company that we have, the luxuries that we have, all of it has been ultra heightened as a result of what we're seeing in Gaza in terms of how comfortable we are, how laxed we are, how comfortable we've got in this dunyai life. And we're now kind of looking towards something to give, something to happen to bring some relief. If it's not Palestine, still Syria, you've got the Uyghurs, the Kashmiris, the Rohingya. The situation is still there and it's worsening. In previous years, Moazzam, with brothers from different persuasions and leanings, there's always those kind of methodological differences that we have. Some would hope and be optimistic in some kind of drastic or radical change happening amongst the military elite of the Muslim countries. Others would be like, well, hold on. They cannot be trusted. They are part of the problem. They are the cogs of the very system which keeps the Ummah in the situation that it's in. Others would be like, no, we just have to carry on doing what we're doing and that Allah will prepare us for a victory when we've collectively reformed as an Ummah. There's all these kind of different methodological discussions and differences we have with brothers and sisters from different groups and movements. Where do you see the Muslim world shifting, my brother?
One of the things I often say to my wife is that let's never forget the level of privilege that we have in the West. We are amongst probably the world's top 5%. And these conversations that we have are an indication of our privilege. What's the ordinary Muslim thinking about? What's the ordinary Muslim who lives in the Muslim world, who has far greater sacrifices that we'd have every day? What are they thinking? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا تَدْرِي النَّفْسُ مَاذَا تَكْسِبُ غَدًا وَمَا تَدْرِي النَّفْسُ بِأَيِّ أَرْضٍ تَمُوتُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the soul doesn't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the soul has no idea in which land it will die. Right? You have no idea. So these great aspirations, of course, they're important for scholars and people who are perhaps able to provide solutions. But for us as ordinary individuals, we've got to work on what's around us and what we're capable of, what's within our reach. What's not within our reach, I question, we can talk about it because that's the nature of privilege. But really, we've got to affect change from what's around us. I look at, and you will see, it's in your community, I know it's in my community, the way the extent to which our youth have become deeply corrupted. You can be in hijab and have boyfriends. You can smoke drugs and still go and pray and fast, and which is all good. Of course, you can do all of those things. But the effect in the end, the collective effect of that, is a deeply corrupted Muslim society. And how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to give us, and why should we seek, therefore, some kind of victory when that's the kind of people we produce? Now, that's why I say Afghanistan, and most likely Gaza at some point, we will see, by definition, the people have been forged in the fire of steel. The word fitna. Mm-hmm. It comes from fatan to dhab.
It's cleaning or cleansing.
It's a cleansing process.
It's a cleansing
It's happened so many times. We've seen, wherever it happens, there's a process by which the Prophet ﷺ hadith, إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلَ الشَّامِ فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ. If the people of Syria and Sham, that doesn't mean Syria, it means the whole of the Sham region, if they become corrupted, there's no good in you. Not in them, in you. So, and the hadith continues, وَلَا تَزَالْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أُمَّتِي مَنْصُورِينَ عَلَى الْحَقِّ لَا يَضُرُّهُم مَّنْ خَذَلَهُمْ حَتَّى تَأْتِيَهُمُ السَّاعَةُ وَهُمْ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. That hadith is part of that. There will always be a group of my ummah victorious upon the truth. They will not be harmed by those who are treacherous towards them until the hour comes, and they will be upon that. So we must recognize that it's through this fire that men will be born, that women will be born, who carry the deen in a way that we could never have imagined. Look at the way, the connection. This young man who was killed just 2 days ago, burnt in his tent. He was a hafiz of the Quran. He's 19 years old.
Yep.
He survived an airstrike on a masjid where 20 people were killed. So what is telling you, where is this kid spending his time anyway? What he's doing, he's a software engineer. You can see an ummah is being created right now. Palestinians, per human being, are the most educated people in the whole of the world.
Yep.
Right? So Allah Azza wa Jal is testing them beyond belief, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them and raise the ranks of the shuhada to the highest levels of Jannah. Them. Because that's where you're going to find people who are not attached. The dunya is not what they're connected to. And remember the hadith of the last hour. What is it? The Prophet ﷺ said that the nations will gather together to take from your lands as animals do at a feast. أَمِنْ قِلَّةٍ نَحْمُ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Are we going to be few in number, Ya Rasulullah? No, لَكِنْ سَتَكُونَ كَالْغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. You're going to be like the filth of the flood water. And in the end, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed al-wahan in your hearts. Al-wahan is like this. The Sahaba asked, وَمَا الْوَهَنْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? And he replies, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةَ الْمَوْتِ. Love of this life and hatred of death. If you're in a position when death is every single day, you're living under its shadow, you don't care about death. That's not what you are. The opposite. You love to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're from the Ummah who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ahad al-Husnain. And when we talk about when victory going to come, well, we're already told there's 2 victories. One, we don't see it victory. Victory is shahada, is victory. It is victory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it victory. And the other is a physical victory. You can't lose. That's how they see it. So through that, through their blood, through their sacrifices, through us watching them, through us being connected to them, through them bringing peace and justice in the end at some point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us success.
Final question. What do you think the priorities are for the community in the West, in Britain? We saw recent race riots in August, and now there's lots of conversations about similar stuff. It's just rehashed, isn't it? Muslims are not assimilated, Muslims are not integrated. You'll find some within our community saying we need to do more, we've not done enough, we've not presented a good case of Islam and Muslims in this country. You've just highlighted some of the issues that we have in our youth. What is the priorities of the community, bro? I mean, if you had to kind of sum up at least your feelings based on your observations, you're from Birmingham, Sharif, Spark Hill, some of the heartlands of the so-called no-go areas. What do you think the community's priorities should be at the moment in the West, in Britain?
I grew up in Birmingham, you said, right? When I was young.
And you went to a Jewish school?
I went to a Jewish school as a child, and we fought neo-Nazis on the streets.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, you have a scar over here, that's from, bottle. So we fight them in the streets, neo-Nazis, Sikh Hal salutes and so forth. But at that time, at least, it wasn't just Muslims they were against. We didn't know what our identity was, but we knew we weren't them. That's all we knew. Because we were black, we were Asian, we were mixed. But Islam wasn't our identity. Time went on and Islam becomes our identity, and they recognize that identity as something to hone in on. Everybody else is okay, but we hate
except
you.
the Muslims.
And so now we are on... And in a sense, the one reason why the Muslims of Britain in particular probably a step ahead in one way from other communities, because we've had to fight so much. Ideologically, physically, politically, at every level, we've had to fight. And, as I said to you before, fighting, not always physically, but fighting creates a certain type of person that's resilient, that's strong, but it also makes a person that's sometimes a little bit detached. And I think that we've got to work on that detachment. We've got a detachment not just from... By our very nature of being here, we become British. Language, customs, culture, that's all entered us. And we should be able to take the best part of that. But part of our role of who we are is to forge a very unique identity. We are British Muslims. There's just no way of getting out of that. We're not from where we came from. We're not where our parents came from. We are in a unique position, for better or for worse. We need to keep our connection to the Ummah. It's crucial that we do. There needs to be cultural exchange. There need to be people from our youth visiting Muslim countries, going back and forth, understanding, learning, becoming multilingual. This monolingual nonsense of Britain is keeping us really deeply disconnected. The Muslims, I would say, here in this country, I would make it obligatory if I could. If I had the power to do so, you've got to learn Arabic. You must learn Arabic. And that is because you need to be connected to the Muslim world. You need to be able to converse. Go to another country, you'll have a terrible experience if that people of that country don't speak your language.
Yep.
You speak the language, every door opens for you.
Yep.
And this is the language of the Quran and the Sunnah. It's the language of the Prophet ﷺ. I would make that a priority for our youth. I would make it a priority for them to learn the Seerah. I would make it a priority above and beyond learning about the different groups. Learn the Quran. I mean, deeply understand it. I never had a better time of connection with Quran than when I was a prisoner, both in Belmarsh and in Bagram and in Guantanamo. The best of times, because you're in solitude. That Quran becomes a living life manual to make reference to his stories from, but also to give you the solace at the times when you need it. So our connection to the Quran has to become so much more above and beyond politics, above and beyond discussions about groups and so forth. And at some point, the Aisha radiallahu anha was asked about what was the Prophet ﷺ's khuluq, and she said, "Kana khuluqul al-Quran." If you want to know about his mannerisms, he was like a walking Quran. I think for us And even if we can't do it with the future generations, we must become embodiments of that. And in that for us is salvation. And just to give you an example, I go with Clive often to Afghanistan. Now, Talib or Taliban by definition means he's a student of the Quran. So his actions, not to say he's perfect, are meant to, he's taught that you must be an embodiment of that Quran. I kid you not, Clive and other non-Muslims I've gone to in Afghanistan, that they have traveled and seen many places around the world, have never come across a people, including those who were in the previous government when they visited, they have never come across a people who have this kind of khuluq, this behavior. And whether it's there, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Birmingham or London, we need to be people of khuluq al-Quran. Our behavior, our manifestation of that behavior is our legacy. And that's what we got to leave behind.
Moazzam, it was a pleasure to have you back on, bro. And I hope you enjoyed coming back after 4.5 years, bro.
Barakallah feekum. Time flies when you're having lots of fun.
Of course.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to be here. I hope that something I said might make sense.
No, it all makes sense.
Often I say things that don't make sense, but
no, it all makes sense. Allah bless you and preserve you, my brother. I mean,
Allah barik fik, Allah barik fik.
Brothers, sisters, friends and foes, I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion as much as I did. Please remember that you can find this episode on all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And of course, if you're tuning in via YouTube, do remember to click subscribe. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.